Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Every American is born with inherent rights. That's what our founding documents say, and the purpose of the U.S. government is to protect those rights. That has been our national creed for hundreds of years, and it's worked. But the left no longer believes it. Progressives have decided that the Bill of Rights applies only to people who agree with them. Their views are protected by the First Amendment. Your views are hate speech. The Second Amendment covers their security detail. You can't be trusted to have a gun at home. Now the activist left is telling us that people who disagree with them no longer have freedom of movement or association. They can't go to the movies or go to restaurants. If they dare leave their homes, they will be surrounded by mobs and threatened. It's happening. Last Friday, White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders and her family were forced to leave a restaurant in Virginia because the owner didn't like their politics. Sanders and her husband went home, but the rest of their family went to another restaurant. That wasn't good enough. They had committed the sin of being related to someone who works at the White House. So progressives continued to harangue them as they tried to eat. This is happening in a lot of places to a lot of people. Protesters, for example, have massed outside the home of White House aide Stephen Miller. In case their intentions weren't clear enough, they put up mock wanted posters with Miller's face on them. A DHS employee, meanwhile, found a burned, decapitated animal carcass on his front porch. Again, the message is crystal clear. Activists on the left are moving toward violence. They are aware of this, and some applaud it. A piece yesterday in Splinter News, which is owned by Univision, explained that intimidating Trump supporters in public places is, quote, just the minimum baseline here. This is all going to get more extreme, and it should, end quote. How extreme? Well, the article fondly recalls the domestic terror bombings of the 1970s. Thousands a year in America. That's our future, the article says. Unfortunately, we're headed there fast. Over the weekend in Los Angeles, Congresswoman Maxine Waters urged the mob to hunt down and find members of the president's cabinet. Here's part of it.
If you think we're rallying now, you ain't seen nothing yet. Already, you have members of your cabinet that are being booed out of restaurants, who have protesters taking up at their house, who's saying no peace, no sleep. No peace, no sleep. Let's stay the course. Let's make sure we show up wherever we have to show up. And if you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome anymore, anywhere.
Maxine Waters isn't just any member of Congress. The Daily Beast calls her, quote, a folk hero. BuzzFeed describes her as the unchallenged new face of the Democratic Party. And indeed she is. She's also a self-described civil rights leader, which makes it a little weird to see her demanding that certain people be denied public accommodations. Sorry, we don't serve your kind at the lunch counter. That's exactly what she is saying, and she said it again yesterday.
I stand by my speech in saying that the protests have already started. They're probably going to continue.
The message of all this is clear. The left no longer considers its political opponents fellow citizens or even human. How long before they start openly calling for something bad to happen to those opponents? Well, in the case of Maxine Waters, it won't be the first time. In 1992, Waters cheered as racist mobs burned Los Angeles. As she put it at the time, riot is the voice of the unheard. When Reginald Denny was dragged from his truck and nearly murdered for the color of his skin, beaten in the head with a cinder block on camera, Waters championed his attackers. She partied with them after their trial. Maxine Waters has a record of endorsing mob violence. Everyone in Washington knows that. Democrats don't care. To his credit, Chuck Schumer did call Waters' most recent remarks, quote, not American. Good for him. But hardly anyone else said anything. Nancy Pelosi blamed Donald Trump for what Waters said. That was a theme. Stop hitting me, they said as they threw the first punch.
I feel that we are in pre-Nazi Germany. The stages of things that are occurring on a daily basis, the obfuscation, the lies, the totalitarian behavior is shocking and horrendous. Yeah. And we have to be vigilant.
They follow the exact pattern that Hitler had. He is evil. He is evil. And the thing is, I thought, oh, he'll come in and he won't really know because he's not that smart. He doesn't, he'll just do a showmanship thing. But he's evil.
This is about racism. This is pure and simple racism. That's all this is. The people who support him are frightened to death of this country becoming the Browning of America.
Something interesting has happened. As progressives become more authoritarian and less tolerant, they seem more convinced that they're fighting actual Nazis rather than their fellow Americans with whom, in the scheme of things, they have only relatively mild political differences. The more they accuse the administration of extremism, the more extreme they become. And that's not surprising, because once you decide that the people who disagree with you are Nazis, everything is allowed. Why wouldn't you threaten them in restaurants or burn their houses down, or who knows? This could very well end in tragedy. You start talking like this and you don't know where it's going to go. Some progressives seem to welcome all that. Quentin James, who's the head of a political action committee that supports Democrats, recently announced that those calling for calm are, quote, accomplices of the current administration. Accomplices? This is the language of total war. It's scary. It has no place in politics. We're heading towards something awful. And the only people who can stop it are the adults on the left. And there are still some. Democratic members of Congress, entertainment figures, religious leaders, media chieftains like Jeff Zucker at CNN or Andy Lack at NBC. They're silent now, cowering and complicit in all of this, but the country badly needs them to cool the rhetoric and rein in the mob. No more Nazi talk on their TV channels. No more screaming at people in restaurants. There's a point of no return, and we are approaching it, and we need their help to pull back.
So here now with more Tucker Carlson, host of Tucker Carlson Tonight. Grew up in California.
Yes, I did.
A lot going on in California.
It's the leading indicator.
They told him he was too brown to...
Well, it's a race-obsessed party. I'm not surprised at all. I mean, ironically. No, that does not surprise me. The whole bet with the Democratic Party in California is that changing demographics win it for them. And they're right to some extent. Immigration has turned it from one of the most reliably Republican states to the most reliably Democratic state. The question now is about the economy. Can you have a state that is basically Latin American in its economic structure? A huge pool of poor people, a small group of rich people, no middle class. That's what California is trying. Its leaders are basically self-consciously pushing policies that result in that. Half of all Californians asked this week said they'd prefer to leave the state. A lot of them already have. What happens then when there's no sort of normal middle class, people making $95,000 left with kids? Like, that's actually where California is going. I don't know what happens.
It's striking to me. Jerry Brown has been around as long as you and I can remember.
He was the governor when I was a kid, and I'm almost 50. I pulled up a picture of him with Linda Ronstadt, because when I was little, I thought, wow, that Jerry Brown's a really cool guy. He goes out with Linda Ronstadt. And I thought, Tucker will appreciate this. Tucker will appreciate seeing Jerry Brown and Linda Ronstadt. But, all the young people on our staffs, they look at pictures of Jerry Brown today, and they go, wow, who's the old guy who's the governor of California? He is old.
But he has made an indelible mark on the state over all these years. That
sure.
And now, it's the first time in 20 years that there's an open governor's race in California.
And his father before him, Pat Brown.
That's
Edmund
right.
Pat Brown. Yeah. The funny thing is, this is how much the state has changed, is that Jerry Brown, whom when I was a kid was derided as Governor Moonbeam, supposedly planted opium poppies along the I-5.
President Trump just called him that recently.
Well,
because he likes that kind of throwback.
Like me, he's an older gentleman. He remembers that. He is now considered by my friends and relatives in California a moderating force. Compared to what is always the question. And so if you live in a state where Jerry Brown is considered sort of sensible and restrained, it tells you a lot. Looks like Gavin Newsom, the former mayor of San Francisco, is going to get it. Also pretty interesting, the same, not just liberal, but the same species of sort of pro-tech liberal will be running the state. I don't see anybody, and I talk to people in California a lot, in state politics at a prominent level who's concerned about the death of the state's middle class. They act like it's just not a big deal. But, the Venezuelan economic model doesn't work. In the end, it collapses.
Yeah.
You need a middle class to sustain an economy, and they're losing theirs.
A couple of things I want to ask you about. You're doing a series that I read about last night I thought was very interesting, that basically, sort of a diversity program in air traffic control in this country is potentially making us less safe every time we get on an airplane.
It's terrifying. I'm interested in standards and their decline for a bunch of different reasons. Diversity is one of them, or the sort of ideology of diversity. But under the Obama administration, the FAA changed the standards for becoming an air traffic controller and instituted a screen, a biographical test that awarded points based on how little you knew So, for example, if you were unemployed for the last 3 years, you got more points than if you had a job. If you knew nothing about science, you got more points than if you were a licensed pilot. This is, again, for an air traffic control job.
This is
They
scary.
intentionally sought the least qualified.
No, they didn't.
Yes, they did. And we've proved it. We have the documents. Our reporter, Alex Pfeiffer, got them. And they don't deny it. I called over to FAA myself to say, can you explain this? How did this make us safer? Air traffic control is a big deal. It's a linchpin of our economy, for one thing. They couldn't answer that because they don't care. That's the point. They don't care whether it makes us safer.
I mean, it's really hard to imagine. I mean, there are a few other areas, but an area, when you look at those maps that show you how many planes are flying across the country at any given moment, it's really hard to imagine a more important job in some ways for safety in this country than the people who are watching the air traffic control.
To award points to someone for failing in science and being unemployed for 3 years is insane. No one can defend it. And by the way, it's not just happening there. It's happening in a lot of other critical parts of American life. But the maintenance of standards, this is an impressive country because we can trust our air traffic control. We take that for granted. We shouldn't. And so it's worth fighting back against this stuff.
The only thing that should be the most important is who's the best, right? Who's the best person at doing that job?
You know,
who's going to
not
keep us
hiring
safe
a
in that
sociology
job?
professor where you might be like, who cares, really? It's just some dumb professor. Air traffic control.
Who's on tonight?
Well, a number of people, including...
When I'm done with my show and I can kick back and relax and go like, hey, Tucker's on.
Hit the minibar in my office. You're free to.
That sounds
Pamela
good.
Anderson is on our show, whom I don't know, but who's a much more interesting person than you might think and knows a lot of different people you wouldn't expect her to know, including Julian Assange, to whom she's very close. So anyway, I'm
Fascinating.
her in just a minute. Yeah, I'm interested to hear what she says.
All right, we'll look forward to it. Thanks, Tucker.
Thank you, Martha.
Great to be here.